Next time we'll make sure Nick doesn't do it from a bathroom stall.
That's a swanky bathroom. Are you literally on?
It looks exactly like it. I can't get over it.
Come on.
I can't get over it, man. It just looks like you're in a bathroom stall.
That's awesome. And with Mark's black cat, I kept thinking we were in the Matrix.
Yeah.
Black cat coming along the front, like
That cat was persistent.
Glitch.
Like, give me attention, damn it.
All right, welcome everyone to another DirectConnect. We're doing the early morning recording for some of us here. Today we're going to talk about IT versus OT, the Royal Rumble, the throwdown, if you will. Can they coexist in the same environment? Are they possible to separate, or are air gaps just as elusive as Bigfoot? Joining me today to talk about it, we have Leonard, Chamberlin, Brent, Castagnetto, and Bryan Carr, all from Archer. So with that, gents, what do you think about those questions? Can they coexist? Can they be air gapped? Necessary evil? Where are we at?
Start. It's the question is a loaded one, right? And working as a consultant for a number of years now, seeing companies try to merge those two together, the IT, the OT, bring them all under one umbrella has been a unique challenge, right? And I don't know that there's a good example that I've seen where we've seamlessly integrated those two disciplines, organizations. It's been just a real a challenging issue over the years. I will say that driving from the top down, having policy that dictates the pace, that having a GOSP that identifies appropriate responsibilities is critical. Whether you're staying separate or you're trying to merge and integrate IT OT.
Brent's looking at the merging side, which that's one of the pieces. I think this is something I've seen where it goes back and forth. Some places are trying to separate while their neighbors are trying to merge, and vice versa. It's kind of the will they, won't they, the Ross and Rachel of the compliance world. So when you're looking at those and they are in the same environment or they're separate environments, what are the considerations you'd look at making a change, whether it's to segregate or to merge them? What are some pros and cons on either side?
Well, from a scoping perspective, the first question is, how do you define IT? How do you define OT? What is the demarcation point when you start talking about those concepts? Whether we're talking about NERC, TSA, or whatever, how you determine which systems you want to segment, which systems you want to coexist, I guess is going to be a key factor in determining success in any, approach. From a, coexistence perspective, as y'all are talking about this, some people are moving away from combining the two infrastructures. Some people are coalescing. I guess it depends on where you are as far as your modernization, if you will, of your OT environment. Traditionally, these have been non-routable environments, requiring you to be physically at the equipment to operate it. But as more and more IT type functionality is added to these systems, it continues to blur the line. Traditional network type equipment obviously would be considered an IT type device. But if its sole function is to carry, protection traffic amongst protective relays, it really ceases to be an IT system at that point and is an integral part of the OT system. So yeah, where you determine what you want to segment, I think is going to be key. Why are we even talking about segmentation? Well, to minimize operational impact of your OT environment from a compromise of your IT system. So, where you set that demarcation point, in my opinion, it can't be at your internet-facing firewall and say everything else is OT, or even your corporate infrastructure, your corporate-facing firewall, and then saying everything else is OT. Invariably, you're going to find some printers, on those networks or other cyber assets that are not essential to delivering that operational functionality. At what point do you say these are in, these are out of scope? Those are key questions that have to be answered.
Your analogy of Ross and Rachel, Nick, I think is dated and inappropriate. I look at IT I look at IT and OT in the sense of using the analogy of Rick and Morty. Rick's been the big brother right on the playground for so many decades. That's OT. They've been running their system effectively, and now we're going to bring in this new sidekick, this IT, and try and integrate that into the environment. And what you realize if you watch that show is one really can't live without the other very long, right? That's kind of a whether you think you're separated or not, you're relying on IT concepts, IT personnel, IT program, or most importantly, IT tools in the OT environment. So there is that integration, but you have a challenge when you look at who's been responsible for what for so many years, and that cultural challenge or cultural change takes time to unravel.
So, Brent, I don't know if you can hear the mob gathering outside your office, but that's the entire IT world taking offense to being called little brother.
Sorry.
And compared to Morty.
I know, and there's an inferiority complex that comes along with that. So I'm not trying to incite a riot. I'm just trying to use appropriate analogies. How's that?
This is where I really want to dig back into the 90s era and hold up the old Al Borland sign with your address on it. So, like a home improvement.
I think, Brent, you touched on something that was a point I wanted to make was the skills gap. I mean, you talked about, Nick, you asked about considerations and understanding if you're separating networks, is kind of obviously the soup of the day or whatever, direction a lot of things go. Do you have the personnel? Do you have the skill sets to be able to manage two distinct networks? Leonard, I think you said something really important is I rarely see a controls network or an ICS or a SCADA network that doesn't have IT components. In it, like you said, everything used to just be non-routable, controllers and relays and whatever. But anymore, it's almost half and half of IT, traditional. I'll call it traditional IT equipment. So it's a potentially skills issue is one of those considerations, but also they're going to be kind of merged anyway. And so you have people who manage these networks or these systems that are going to need to know both. There's no way around it. They're going to need to know how to manage switches or routers or other server infrastructure along with controllers, relays, and those types of devices. So that to me is a big one. I currently working with a couple of clients that are going through that right now, and they recognize that they don't have the expertise to manage all aspects of it separately. It's definitely a challenge and something you got to be aware of.
I think one of the biggest things I've seen is the cultural side between IT and OT, kind of the service level agreement, where, if your CEO goes without email access for a couple hours, it's not fun for anyone, but that's a whole different thing than losing the control center for a couple hours. So just that's a different mindset. And I know it's something we'd see when I was at Grant from people who go from the help desk, where there was an expectation of, you'll get it when you get it, to over to the OT side or even into my security system admin of, nope. You are on 24/7. Your SLA is immediate. So that's another piece that gets overlooked a lot, I think, in the softer side of the merge or the considerations between the two.
Before we move on to another question, Brent, regarding something you said, Siri, how do you define ironic? Oh, calling friends inappropriate, but insinuating Rick and Morty isn't.
I wasn't calling him inappropriate. I was calling his analogy inappropriate and dated, to be clear, to be fair to my words, right?
So when you're putting together that plan to segregate your IT and OT, or put them together, either way, I guess we'll go with this one. What are the big considerations, the major pieces that if you miss, it's going to fail? I know, Brent, you've had some experience doing those major segmentations lately. What are the pieces you got to hit? Where do you start?
I mentioned it starts from the top, right? So you have to have leadership dictate the pace. This is where we're going. This is why. And help their employees, their subject matter experts, recognize the why. Why are we moving this direction or that? And then clearly define the responsibilities, right? In a GOSP. Make sure it's documented, it's well understood, recognized from the top down what we're responsible for, right? Because I think when people understand the why, they're more inclined to get on board, right? To get on track with what we're trying to accomplish here, what our goals are. When people don't understand the why, they tend to struggle with that. I'm no different than any other subject matter expert. So that would be my piece of advice, right? If regardless of which way we're going to have clearly defined roadmaps and workflows to understand who's working on what at any given time.
I would say it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be cheap. Don't try to be frugal and deploy a virtualized environment. And when I say virtualized, I mean let's deploy VLANs and now we're segmented. The industry's been saying for decades that VLANs are not security, right? They were never intended for that. They're traffic, management construct to improve your network's performance, not to implement some type of cybersecurity. From an operational standpoint, when you're sharing the same physical infrastructure, that means that's a common point of failure. So if there's a way to compromise that hardware that supports the virtual environment from the less secure side, then the more secure side is going to naturally be impacted by that threat vector. From an easy perspective, let's just leave this system, on the OT side because it's too hard to re-engineer and figure out how to put it on the other side of the fence, the segmentation line. I mean, that's the whole point of doing this, right? Is to reduce the potential operational impact. So there are going to be systems that it's not going to be, a simple straight shot, solution. Try not to cut corners.
I'll add to it, really understanding what you have out there in your environment is kind of a foundational building block. You'd be surprised how many folks don't really have a good grasp, even from an inventory perspective, but understanding what traffic is out there on a particular network and what needs to go where and why. A lot of OT devices aren't as talkative as IT type devices, and you may not see any traffic from them. And we've seen it happen several times before where, certain ports are not enabled or open, and some of that OT traffic shows up and, there's nowhere for it to go. So I think one of those foundational pieces is understanding what you have and what kind of traffic you anticipate on either of the networks.
So it's not good to just start tearing things apart and figure it out as you go?
Or just turn everything off and, see what happens, see what you really need. I wouldn't recommend it.
That's one way to do a business impact analysis there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you could definitely work on that.
So those are the big things. What are the detailed pieces? I think we've all been in projects where something that was an afterthought turned into kind of the Achilles heel of a project. What are those things as you look at these that either they're just going to become a persistent nagging problem or they'll turn into a big thing if you don't think about them? I'll jump in right now with kind of the documentation side, your policies, procedures, diagrams, the compliance, administrivia, if you will. When do you do that? Before, after, during? Compliance never sleeps, so.
I think I'll start there. You have to bake that in, right? If you're trying to bolt that on after the fact, you've probably already missed the boat. Along with what I said, driving the policy procedure, the compliance documentation, compliance effort, compliance energy that's needed to commission new assets or recommission if you're building an entire new environment and bringing IT and OT together. That's a lot of work. And so recognizing there are significant outputs that are required from a compliance and security perspective, I think is really, really important. And a lot, folks miss that. Like, we're going to build this system. We're doing a full EMS upgrade, forklift upgrade of our entire environment. And they're like, yeah, we get it. Operationally, we put it together, no problem. But they forget about along the way, they should have been documenting, commissioning dates, commissioning efforts, commissioning activities, because that's going to go a long way in alleviating auditors' concerns. Did you do this appropriately?
Yeah, agreed. That performance evidence is such a key, demonstrator that the work has been accomplished. Very difficult as an auditor to come in and say, okay, well, understood you had to segment this plant in order to not meet the medium impact bright line of 1,500 megawatts. Show me how your work. Show me that you're not just telling me that it's segmented. Okay, well, here's a network diagram. Okay, you're documenting your supposed new infrastructure, but again, that's not sufficient performance evidence by itself. It doesn't stand on its own to demonstrate that the work has been accomplished. You expect to see updated configuration files, change tickets, screen captures where appropriate. Those are the type things that really demonstrate that work effort is done. To your point, as far as working on the administrative processes, procedures, policies on the front end, I completely agree. But with the note that, they're not going to be set in stone, never to change. They're going to be living documents, right? They're going to be lessons learned, continually updated at some periodic review.
So you should have your TFEs done before you architect your system. Is that what I'm hearing there? Waiting for Dr. TFE to weigh in on that one.
No comment.
Let's back into this TFE, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to build for the TFE? All right. Technical feasibility exception for our non-SIP lucky listeners. All right. Anything else to consider as you're looking at segregating or unifying IT and OT?
Be patient. It takes time, right? It takes time to change that. It's a cultural shift and a significant one. So regardless of which way you choose, be patient with that. Don't just abandon it at the first challenge, because there will be many along the way.
Kind of like a construction project, just plan for an extra 50% cost and time.
So, yeah. I don't know if it's that high, but it's something along those lines.
So I reference it as the 3-4-5 rule. 3 times as long, 4 times as many people, 5 times the cost. Whatever combination, you can kind of move those numbers around. But definitely, it's going to take longer than you think. I don't know that I've seen a significant IT project, or even OT project for that matter, go exactly as scheduled. So just the nature of the beast. A lot of stakeholders.
A lot of stakeholders and a lot of things to learn throughout it too, I think. How about you, Leonard? Any parting thoughts on segmentation or unifying?
I think the paramount thing to keep in mind as you're looking at this is identify your your must-run systems. Minimize operational impact to the best degree possible. So as you're proceeding with any type of segmentation, separation, you've tested the change, you know that you have a backup plan. You hope that things are going to go smooth, but there's always the unknowns, right? Expect the unexpected.
Sage advice for any time you're doing any sort of change management, but certainly the case on a project of this scope and magnitude. So, thanks for joining. If you have additional questions on IT versus OT, putting them together, taking them apart, Ross and Rachel and you, I don't care what you say, Brent, I'm holding to it. Reach out. We'll be happy to bend your ear on. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care,
everybody.
guys.
Thank you.
Stay up to date on all the videos we release here at Archer by clicking on the subscribe button. Click on the bell to be notified right away when we release new videos. If you know of a topic or someone you think we should talk to on DirectConnect, please let us know in the comments below.